With our Tapestry annual meeting coming up next month, I've spent an inordinate amount of time looking at spreadsheets and numbers with our finance team. It is not my forte, but it has to be done, I am told. It's sometimes said that a budget is a moral document. As an organization, as individuals, or even a company, the budget we set for ourselves, the financial commitments we make, reflect what we value. What brought me to this worship service today was the fact that equity is a financial term. We live out our values in dollars and cents. The way we spend our money is a reflection of what we value. Which begs the question, on Mother's Day, how much do you love your mother? I have to laugh sometimes at how stereotypically middle-aged I have become when I order flowers for Mom on Mother's Day. Living closer and getting to spend some time together would be ideal, but we do what we can. Mother's Day is an opportunity to show Mom a little gratitude. But really, how does one say thank you for years of literally keeping me alive? For dinners and practical advice. Thank you for encouragement and teaching me to be a functional, decent human being. Thank you basically for my life. Here's a handful of flowers. Obviously, it isn't just the gift that matters, though I would advocate for occasionally doing something extravagant for Mom. The significance of Mother's Day gestures is the sincerity behind them. The same is true for efforts at building equity. The material stuff matters. Whether it's land or money, it matters. But what also matters is the spirit in which it is given, or we might more accurately say returned. One of the first things that comes to mind with regard to equity and financial fairness is the issue of reparations. And that word, reparations, can feel overwhelming. How much money and to whom? Who's going to pay? It immediately seems like a huge whirlwind of questions. That's in part because we jump to the larger example, the largest example we can imagine. Reparations for descendants of Black people who were enslaved in the United States. There are other examples of reparations, though, that can teach us about equity. As I mentioned, it isn't just about the money or the land. Among American Indians, reparations serve a material symbol, an acknowledgement of past wrongs. It's not to fully compensate for historical losses. Such a compensation would be way beyond financial measure. There are likely some American Indians who seek such a complete restoration. For most, the goal is to move in the direction of a mended, healthier, more respectful relationship. American Indian scholar William Bradford explained that creating justice is more complex than a financial tit for tat. Rather than a one-time cash payment, he suggests a new understanding with 7 stages. They include acknowledgement, apology, peacemaking, commemoration, compensation, land restoration, legal reformation, and reconciliation. I want to repeat those because they're important steps, and each one a little bit different. Acknowledgement, apology, peacemaking, commemoration, compensation, land restoration, legal reformation, and reconciliation. I love this description of justice for two reasons. First, because it talks about real honesty and material compensation for losses. And the model ends with the ultimate goal of reconciliation. To create real, lasting change, reparations has to be more than a resentful, begrudging, handing back what once was stolen. I believe we can do better than the forced apology of an elementary school child on the playground. Another example of reparations that I learned more about this week was the movement of Japanese Americans to be compensated for their loss during the internment camps here. 2 months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the executive order allowing military commanders to designate, this is so perfectly vague, exclusion zones, areas from which any and all persons may be excluded to protect the country. Well, that turned into 112,000 people of Japanese descent being incarcerated in the United States. 2/3 of them were US citizens. They were detained in crowded barracks surrounded by barbed wire. Between 1942 and 1945, 10 detention centers were established. During this rounding up, nearly all property of the detainees was stolen or confiscated, including their land and real estate. In the late 1970s, the Japanese American Citizens League and the civil rights organization National Redress began a fight for reparations. Finally, in 1988, a full decade after the campaign began and 40 years after internment camps closed, President Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, which offered $20,000 to each survivor. A complicating factor was generational struggle among Japanese American community. The older generation embraced traditional values that encouraged them to put the past behind them, to endure and persevere with dignity. To them, seeking reparations seemed like going backwards. The younger generation, though, were deeply influenced by the civil rights movement. They were motivated by justice and seeking equity. Some really, really hard conversations ensued in the community. Eventually, they found a way forward. Within any community that has experienced oppression, coming to a shared vision of what is right and just can be a long journey. One of the roles that supportive allies can play is to be respectful and supportive as communities determine for themselves what equity looks like for them. There are times to stay out of it and encourage from the sidelines in justice work. This last week, I learned about one more piece of reparations that's happening right now, right in our backyards. The LA Times ran a story about another reparations movement. It's California Assembly Bill 1950, about the Chavez Ravine Accountability Act that seeks an equitable resolution to the forced removal of residents of Chavez Ravine. This was all news to me. Before Chavez Ravine became the baseball field for the LA Dodgers, it was an enclave for mostly lower-income Mexican-American and other non-white immigrant families. Barred by racial covenants and other discriminatory practices from living elsewhere in the city, they settled in Chavez Ravine to build a close-knit community with local churches, stores, and a school. To some LA city leaders, the neighborhood looked poor and blighted, and an idea came to turn the area into a new public housing project called Elysian Park Heights. So in 1950, the city began removing people from their homes. Some were offered below market cash offers with a promise that they would be first on the list for this new housing development. Some had to accept what was given them under an eminent domain process. Some refused to leave and were removed, carried out. Some got nothing. All of them had been promised to get first dibs on returning to this newly created housing. But surprise, before the residents were completely removed, the public housing project was abandoned. And in 1957, the city traded 130 acres to Walter O'Malley, the owner of Brooklyn Dodgers. Assembly Bill 1950, the Chavez Ravine Accountability Act, would give descendants of the affected families and any surviving residents what they say is fair and equitable compensation. A task force would figure out how many descendants are due compensation, what's fair for them, and what the city could afford to pay. It's estimated that 1,800 families were displaced. It isn't clear exactly how many people this will affect or how much it will cost the city. The ultimate question is what responsibility the city and state have to make this right. Looking at these smaller scale reparations projects is a window, I think, into understanding how we might begin to heal some of the original sins of this beautifully diverse country that we share. Reparations isn't just about paying for material injustices. It's also about repairing the complex tapestry of community. Reparation is not about making amends and going in our separate directions. It's really about mending relationships. What inspired today's sermon was this understanding of equity as a financial word. Financially speaking, equity is an ownership interest in property that may be offset by liabilities officially. I had to look that up. Although this week the topic is money, we would be wise to think twice about money and ownership being the ethical bottom line. Accumulation of wealth and ownership is deeply ingrained in our culture, but man, it has led to some messy ways of living. Just a few weeks ago, I spoke about Bodhisattva Mother Earth, the living earth that sustains us and created us and shares wisdom and compassion with us. Yet our capitalist culture tells us that sacred land is to be divided up, labeled with a price tag, bought and sold over and over again. She is something for us to own and use. The obsession with ownership also underlies the American Indian genocide and what we've done here. And of course, it's difficult to say, but that obsession with ownership and wealth also led many white Americans to believe that they could rightfully own other human beings. Generation after generation of owning other people. Seeking justice through building equity is very delicate when we're talking about ownership and wealth. It's said that just a few days before Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, he was at a party at the home of Harry Belafonte. During the party, he got into this argument. I imagine they argued a lot among each other in those days. It was about the Poor People's Campaign. As Harry Belafonte reports, King was very clear that the problem was not just a little fix here and there. The problem was the whole system. King criticized the unequal distribution of economic resources and the way the system serves the rich at the expense of the poor. He observed that the wealth of the rich exceeds conscience, and almost all others are doomed to be poor at some level. He said, quote, "But what troubles me now, for all the steps we've taken toward integration, I've come to believe that we are integrating into a burning house." Harry Belafonte blurted out, "Damn, Martin. If that's what you think, what would you have us do?" And he answered, "I guess we're just going to have to become firefighters. I guess we're just going to have to become firefighters." But how? How are we called to build beloved community in a house that is on fire? How are we called to welcome our marginalized neighbor and offer the fruits of a society that is still broken? I don't know exactly how to walk that line. I do know that the first job of a firefighter, the first necessary piece of saving lives, is to recognize that the house is in fact on fire and tell other people to get help. The house is on fire. The system is still broken. Even while we fight for equal access within the system, we continue to remember that many of the laws and structures of government function to maintain unjust distribution of power and inequitable distribution of wealth. Seeking equity on the way to equality, I'm learning, is a narrow path that we walk. Fortunately, our faith tradition prepares us well for the job of being firefighters and doing hard work together. Amen.